Hey guys, it's Syama here, CEO of Scaling Retail, and this week we're talking about manufacturing. The big debate is domestic, international, what to do, what is the right decision for your fashion business? Well, it's a complicated matter because obviously as we look to a more globalized marketplace, we have to ask ourselves, how do we balance the difference between, what's going to be more expensive, where do I have the most oversight, and then also where am I going to be able to get the best talent, right? Where am I able to source what it is exactly that I need? So in this video, we're going to unpack the pros and cons between using domestic manufacturing, doing international manufacturing, what the guarantees are with this, and how to really set yourself up for a great deal of success as a startup or a growth stage business. So let's get started. When it comes to domestic manufacturing, it's really a big trend that's taken off in the United States here in the last 5 years. Now, certainly back in the 50s, and as we look at kind of our industrial revolution and where things have been historically within our country, we've been able to see there's been a huge shift towards obviously producing and having manufacturing here domestic. And then as we moved through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we saw a huge shift to the global marketplace. Now, as we opened up our borders and start to produce more internationally, that really gave rise to a huge competitive market, right? It allowed us as manufacturers and creators of products to work with manufacturers overseas to diversify our talent pool and also to be able to get labor at lower rates. But now, fast forward, right, 2019, 2020, how do we want to now approach a globalized market, and what makes sense as far as our ethics, our pocketbook, and then also what we can actually just kind of mentally wrap our heads around? So as a startup, a lot of companies say, hey, I'm going to produce domestically. And a lot of the different rationalities behind that have to do with having oversight. Certainly if you're working with a company in Los Angeles, and you're living in Miami, it's a lot easier to get on that same time zone or hop on a flight in order to be able to check out and see what that manufacturer is doing. This becomes a lot more challenging when you're thinking about working abroad and possibly being on the phone at midnight or 1 a.m. negotiating or having oversight on your production that's happening in India or in China or any of the other countries around the world where you might be choosing to do your production. On the flip side of that, right, when we start to look at things like talent sourcing and where we might find globalized talent, things like embroidery, right, or having access to better silk, and certainly the manufacturers who have access to those kinds of raw materials a lot easier, you might be looking at production in places like China. Now, unfortunately, places like China and India have gotten a bad reputation when it comes to scaled-up manufacturing. And while I can't say that all factories are compliant, we're certainly far from that case. More and more factories have been taking a very big effort in order to become more sustainable, transparent, and be able to adhere to much better labor practices so that domestic U.S. companies and brands, and even globally brands, want to be able to do business and feel good about doing business in China and India and in these other markets. So while, again, we're far from having full transparency on all of them, this is a really strong indication that the globalized market is becoming more transparent, which should also give rise to feeling positive about doing business out there. Now, one of the second things to keep in mind is obviously price point. When it comes to a branding versus price point conversation, a lot of times people will say, well, I'm making my products here in the US, so obviously I can charge a premium price. It's not necessarily the case. The Made in the USA brand mark, or having that be a symbol of quality, is not really strong enough to build a business around. Your business needs to be built around beautiful images, the branding, how you're positioning it, all the marketing. All of that kind of outward-facing customer information and branded touch points ultimately become the reason why someone buys from you. And having a sustainability and transparency piece to your business is a really amazing thing. However, it doesn't mean that being sustainable or transparent only has to take place in the US. In fact, having a strong business model and knowing where your products are being made is certainly something that can happen on a more globalized level. The major difference here has to come down to your cost of goods, labor, and production. Companies that are based in the US oftentimes tend to be able to give much smaller minimum quantity needs, meaning you might be able to find a manufacturer in Los Angeles that'll be able to produce maybe 10 to 25 units per piece. All of a sudden, as you look to international export and international manufacturing, the needs for those minimum quantities are going to be much higher. All of a sudden, you're looking at 100 units, maybe 500 units. And obviously, the more that you're able to produce at scale, the cheaper price you get. So even off the bat, if you're taking a look at manufacturing internationally, you might find that automatically, if you can make those minimums, the pricing might be worth it. And then as you scale up, your cost of goods will just get lower and lower. So when it comes to scalability, international happens to be predominantly a strong place for you to look to drive that profit and bottom line. Now, when it comes to skill sets and expertise, I love the artisan marketplace. I love the fact that there are regions in India that really focus on block printing or hand embroidery and very indigenous and exclusive talents that are very specific to different places around the world. So not only can you have the opportunity to drive down your cost of goods on production and design, but you also have an opportunity to leverage international talent and add a certain essence and quality to your products that you might not have had you chose to produce domestically. So it's really not an easy answer, right? Whether or not you choose to produce locally because you don't want to have to be up at midnight or 1 a.m. speaking to another country, maybe you're tired, maybe your communication doesn't get quite across, so maybe you opt for domestic in order to start your business so you can have more oversight, get familiar with the production process, or maybe you even build out your own manufacturing. I've seen some amazing brands that have actually partnered up with local manufacturing from a business and investment standpoint in order to take advantage of having production that's domestic and local, but also because of their ownership in the manufacturing component, also have a much lower cost of goods, right? Because you're able to have ownership over the entire supply chain. So there are a lot of different ways of approaching domestic manufacturing, but really the bottom line here is do not rely on the Made in USA brand in order to be a huge differentiator in the market. Choose to produce in the US if it makes sense for other business reasons, meaning you want to have oversight, you want to be able to visit that factory, you want to be able to maybe have an investment or have ownership in a factory, and then look at your international market partners when it comes to diversifying talent, when it comes to getting better cost of goods on higher minimums, and when it comes to being able to plan out further in advance, because a lot of these international manufacturers are working with some of the most famous brands that you and I know domestically. And because they're able to plan with some foresight, they can really make those relationships super advantage to them in the long run. All right, guys, if you want to learn more information and find out more about the best ways to really negotiate and understand manufacturing, make sure you take a look at our article on the lingo you need to know. Certainly, lots of different kinds of terms that you need to be able to unpack as you're having those conversations. And then as you take a step further and want to understand how to assortment plan and really provide the best possible production schedule, timeline, and product assortment, make sure you take a look at our download doc specifically on assortment planning. It's really going to help drive not only what you create in the market, but also how you choose to work with your manufacturers. All right, guys, best of luck to you. Leave comments below. Head on over to Instagram at Scaling Retail. And hey, if you have questions about building, launching, or growing your fashion business, make sure you send us an email at hello@scalingretail.com. Thanks so much. Bye.